We're going to talk about your imminent trade deal with Australia. It's important. But first, let's address what's going on in Downing Street at the moment. After he resigned as Veterans Minister on Tuesday, Johnny Mercer told this station that the British government is, and I quote, the most distrustful, awkward environment I've ever worked in, and in it almost no one tells the truth. He's kind of got it spot on, hasn't he?
Well, I don't agree with that at all. I think Johnny has done a very, very good job on veterans. And what we now need to do is move forward on the legislation, which we are absolutely doing. I don't recognise those comments about the government.
Well, you just need to open the papers over the last couple of days and you might get some sort of insight. First, a rash of briefings by Downing Street, authorised by the Prime Minister on Dominic Cummings, then Dominic Cummings' retaliation. It's hardly the nest of singing birds the Prime Minister likes to talk about, is it?
Well, in terms of the work I'm doing and the work my colleagues are doing across government, we're getting on with the job. We've just had a huge success. We've reached 50% of all people in Britain vaccinated. We're building the economy post-COVID. I'm talking to you later about the Australian trade deal. And we're getting on with the job. And of course, there are always noises off in these circumstances. There's always Westminster tittle-tattle that takes place. But I think the public can see that we're getting on with the job of dealing with this appalling pandemic and building Britain's future after it.
Well, that might be the feeling of cabinet ministers, but this is Downing Street, Ms Truss. This is the Prime Minister ringing up editors himself to slag off his former closest advisor. This is not media tittle-tattle or our invention. This is you and your people doing this. It's slightly rich to just call it tittle-tattle, isn't it?
Well, all of the interactions I have with the Prime Minister is completely focused on dealing with the pandemic, building back Britain and getting on with the job. And of course, the media love reporting these kind of internal he said, she said, but that is not the reality of what the government is spending its time doing. And it's not the reality of what's happening on the streets of Britain and what the public actually care about.
A former member of the government, Johnny Mercer, who was in your government until Tuesday evening, obviously disputes that. But can we move on to the allegations that Dominic Cummings has levelled, because they are quite serious. When are we going to know specifically exactly what happened with this number 11 flat redecoration? In particular, which donors were asked to pay for it, how much they offered to pay, and what they expected back in return?
The important point here is that the Prime Minister has met the costs of the flat refurbishment, and there was information published in the House of Lords on Friday on this subject. All of the reporting is taking place in line with the rules, and the costs have been met. So, I think on this subject, it's pretty clear what has happened, and I'm confident that the rules are being adhered to.
I think what's clear is the Prime Minister felt the need to fit the £58,000 bill, because that's how much government says it's cost for his refurb of the flat where he and Carrie Simons live, on Friday, simply to try and escape this complete tidal wave of new allegations. Are you denying that a donor was approached to pay for this refurb?
Well, as you can imagine, Tom, I'm spending my time focused on negotiating trade deals. I spent 2 solid days with the Australians on Thursday and Friday, so I'm not, au fait with the details of the number 10 flat refurbishment. I do know that the Prime Minister has met the cost of the refurbishment. I know that the rules are being complied with in terms of the reporting, and that's the important thing.
This cost he's met himself, the £58,000, is it out of his own pocket or is it from a loan from someone?
My understanding is it's from his own pocket that he is meeting the costs of this refurbishment.
Okay, I mean, you say all the rules are being followed, but approaching donors to pay for a number 10 refurb is highly irregular. Dominic Cummings thought it was, and I quote, possibly illegal. Now, that's his word. We've got no proof of that either. But do you not think it would be of huge help to everybody, not just to simply take your, albeit excellent word for it on a Sunday morning, that everything is fine, nothing to see here, and actually publish what really happened, declare what donors were approached by who and when?
But all the declarations are being made in line with the rules.
You're talking about the donors. You're going to declare your conversation with donors on this.
All of the information that needs to be in the public domain has either been made public or will be made public in line with this refurbishment that's taking place. And we're absolutely committed to that as a government.
The other allegation Dominic Cummings made is about the inquiry into the November lockdown. The leaking of that was, as I'm sure you agree, a pretty serious event. When are we going to hear who was responsible?
Well, my understanding is that leak inquiry is still ongoing. I don't know. I don't believe any conclusions have been reached of that inquiry. And obviously, it's a serious issue if confidential government information is being placed in the public domain.
It is, and this was November, the leak was. We're now in April, we're 6 months on. I mean, the government have some idea who did this?
Well, my understanding is that the inquiry hasn't reached a conclusion yet.
Do you think it might be Dominic Cummings? He says it wasn't him. The Cabinet Secretary had cleared him.
Honestly, Tom, I have no idea. I'm not involved in this leak inquiry. It's being conducted by the Cabinet Secretary. And I think I'm not going to speculate about who was responsible for this. I'm keen as a Cabinet Minister to make sure that confidential information is kept confidential. What the public want is they want to know government is being conducted responsibly, we're taking the right decisions at the right time, and that is our focus.
Okay, we'll move on from Dominic Cummings in a minute because there are definitely other things to talk about. But are you a little sorry that what is now the final full week of local election campaigning is now being dominated on headlines from, on your side, certainly the fence anyway, by this form raid, throwing all sorts of mud he can think of at the Prime Minister? It's not a hugely becoming thing for such a former senior member of the government to do, is it?
Well, I think the British public will draw their own conclusions about the motivations behind this. And certainly from speaking to members of the public in my constituency, their focus is much more on the vaccine programme, how we're reopening the economy, what Britain's future interests are, how we're going to make sure that jobs and growth are protected. That's what the public are concerned about. And I'm sure they will draw their own conclusions about the allegations that have been made.
What are your conclusions?
Well, my conclusions are that this is not central to the work the government is doing, and that the government should be focusing, as we are, on dealing with coronavirus and building back the economy, not talking about refurbishment of the Prime Minister's flat.
Okay. Last question on Dominic Cummings, I promise. Front page of the Mail on Sunday today.
You said that the previous question, Tom.
No, I said that was the last. We were entering the last series of questions. Now this really is the last one. I just wanted to know, because you've worked with Dominic Cummings. He's been in government. You've been in government for some years now. He is apparently a nasty, sexist piece of work, according to some of the briefings to him. How did you find him as an individual? Was he charming, friendly, warm, kind?
Dominic, I worked with him at the Department of Education and also when he was at Number 10. And, in many ways, he's committed to reform. He obviously had a leading role in the Brexit campaign. But the fact is that he's now left Downing Street. The world has moved on and the government is making huge progress with the vaccine programme, with our trade agenda. And that's what we're focused on now.
Let's then talk about that trade agenda. You've, on Friday, you said you've reached a consensus on a deal which you now expect to sign in June. Agriculture has been one of the biggest sticking points so far in the talks, certainly on Australia's side. Would you agree with that?
Well, agriculture is always a key issue in any trade negotiations, but this negotiation covers a vast gamut of areas, from tariffs on products like cars and whiskey through to better arrangements for visas, through to digital and data and financial services. And what we have agreed on is the vast majority of a deal, which is completely comprehensive, will bring our two economies closer together and give more opportunities for businesses in Britain to export to Australia. And also it gives us a really important foothold in the Asia-Pacific market, which is one of the fastest growing parts of the world. So, of course, agriculture is important, but it is one element of a much bigger deal.
A big ask for Australia, though, was for an increase in quotas for their meat and other animal products. They're huge exporters of meat, beef, and etc. And then a gradual move to total liberalisation over a number of years, no quotas at all. What have you agreed on that?
Well, I'm not going to go into details of the deal because there are still some elements to be worked out. We're confident there's a landing zone. We're confident that we will secure agreement in principle by June. But the point I would make about agriculture is there's a growing market across the world for high quality meat. We've just removed the ban on British beef going into the United States. We're seeing increasing sales into there. We're seeing increasing sales of beef and lamb into the Asia Pacific market. So there are huge opportunities out there for British products. So I don't think we should be defensive about this. I think there's a growing market. The Australians already mainly export to the Asia Pacific area, which is of course much closer to their home market, and there are opportunities for UK suppliers as well. Only recently I visited a Welsh supplier selling beef and lamb into countries like the Philippines, Malaysia, and there's so much more opportunities in that area. So I don't think we need to be defensive.
No, sure, but the outcome of this deal will mean more meat coming here from Australia, won't it?
Well, the outcome of this deal is all about increasing trade between our two nations. And
Right.
of course, I want us to be able to get our hands on high quality Australian products in the same way as I want the Australians to be able to get their hands on high quality British products. But it's really important that in all of our deals, we don't want to see the high standards of our farmers undermined. And, that is exactly what I'm negotiating with Australia and indeed with others.
Well, we'll get to that, but more meat coming from Australia, as I think you've just agreed will happen, more Australian steak, whatever it might be, as tasty as it might be. It's great for consumers. It's cheaper, probably, because Australians farm on vast scale, as you know. But it will mean that British farmers, British beef farmers, will be able to sell less of their product because that Australian product will be here. That's correct, isn't it?
I don't agree with that at all. That implies there's a zero-sum game.
So
As I said,
are we going to eat more meat and pollute? Because that's one of the big problems with climate change, isn't it? We've got to eat less meat.
Global demand for meat is increasing. The Asian middle class in particular is growing rapidly. By 2030, 66% of the world's middle classes will be in Asia, and they have huge demand for high quality meat. If you just look at America, there's a 15% year-on-year rise in demand for grass-fed beef. There is a growing market for these products. And I don't think as I said, I don't think we need to be defensive. Of course, I want us to be able to buy high quality products here in Britain, but British beef and British lamb is some of the best in the world. And what we need to be doing is getting out there and selling that across the world. We've just got this new Open Doors campaign, which is exactly doing that. And there is no evidence, there is absolutely no evidence, Tom, that we would see price drops as a result of that. In fact, the price of beef in a lot of Asia Pacific markets is higher than it is in Europe and the UK.
Okay, well, let's see how that one works out. Another big Australian ask has also been for the UK to accept hormone-treated beef. Will we do that?
I'm absolutely clear we're not going to be lowering our food import standards.
Does that mean you won't take hormone-treated beef?
Correct. It's banned at the moment in terms of our import standards.
And that's not going to change?
Correct.
Okay, let's move on. A couple other things I do want to put to you before you have to go. We've done a really interesting interview, we think, certainly, with Richard Moore, the new chief of MI6, this morning. He tells us that MI6 has begun spying operations on countries to make sure they uphold their commitments on climate change, which is quite a fascinating new development. We didn't know about that before. Is calling out individual countries for not fulfilling their promises now there's something the government intends to do, perhaps as the hosts of COP26 this year?
Well, I do think it is important that countries abide by their international obligations. And in terms of the trade space, one of my concerns is countries like China aren't being transparent about their subsidies or unfairly undercutting British business, and we need to hold them to account. And that's what I'm doing through the World Trade Organization. And likewise, if countries sign up to climate change commitments and don't follow them, then that is a matter of concern.
And finally, on India, obviously we're seeing some horrendous scenes coming to the forefront now. Horrendous cases, death tolls, crematoriums now melting because having to burn so many bodies. What is Britain doing to help? And have we relinquished our claim for those 5 million AstraZeneca doses being produced by the Serum Institute in India?
Well, I was on the phone to my Indian counterpart last week, offering support in terms of what we can do to help India. The particular need at the moment is around oxygen, and we are working on a package to be able to support India because, as you rightly say, this is a devastating situation. It's very, very difficult. India are a very important friend and ally, and my heart goes out to the Indian people at the circumstances that they face, and we are doing all we can to help support that immediate effort.
We might be able to help them with oxygen supplies.
I hope so, yes.
Gloria's got a couple of quick questions for you before we go.
Hi, Elizabeth Truss. I just want to ask you about the fact that you're the Equalities and Women's Minister, and you're one of the most senior women in politics. The briefing against Carrie Simons is intense, and it looks sexist. Do you feel a sense of sisterly solidarity when you see some of the things that are written about her?
Well, I do think there is a issue with portrayal of women in the media, and I don't like to see sort of personal and sexist attacks taking place.
And finally, a registered sex offender is running as a candidate to be the MP in the Hartlepool by-election. Why is this allowed? Why is he allowed to stand?
I'm afraid I don't know the circumstances of that, Gloria, but I will look into that.
As the Equalities Minister, I imagine that would concern you, wouldn't it?
Well, it depends on what exactly the circumstances are. So I'm not going to make a comment about a situation I'm not aware of.